Well, classes discussadores, the discussing class, is the class that Carl Schmitt faces off in uh, the most extreme situation of lethality against the class of decision makers. I give an analogy which attempts to be at the same time an example, which in a way stretches out the principle and gives it significance. So if we take the statement of the Russian passionary Alexander Dugin, who says Tarkovsky is pretentious. So this strikes us as almost too much, as it were, almost a tragedy somehow. How can, if true, this seems that it would be terrible, because the Westerner is used to thinking, as in we find in Zizek, for instance, that Tarkovsky is somehow something almost sacred, although one seldom would say, qualify it by saying Russian version of sacredness, as one would always do in referring to Dostoevsky, for instance. So actually this is something co-opted by the West. And so, for instance, a few years ago at the PFA, before the at the Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley, before the COVID outbreak began, I saw to an entirely sold out house the Stalker. So this movie with this great actor whose name I forget. So he didn't use Solonitsyn, who he usually uses, but Alexander something else, who I believe was also a film director himself. A very profound performance, and also an interesting personality in this. And this was presented at the PFA as sort of the exemplar of what the PFA is for. Almost, this seemed to be the atmosphere in the PFA. This is the essential and true work of art. And so then, if you hear Zizek, he says this form of spiritualism as materialism is the latest thing. Like this, the ones who are supposedly the most spiritual, Tarkovsky, always present their films in the sort of the most concrete form, but then there's like some kind of moment where an image in Rembrandt is repeated in the figures, and then there's some kind of Nietzschean Rausch comes in, but in a very subtle way, and it just says apodictically, now the hysteria has come in from Zizek's point of view, or whatever the proper technical sense would be, but I just point to it. But or now the whatever, some kind of Freudian flaw has fallen in. I suppose seen from the good side of it, it's like now grace and miracle has come into the world, like in Solaris, for instance, and all these strange things are happening, which are analogized by Tarkovsky himself to the parable of the prodigal son in the biblical text. But against this, Dugin says, no, a philosopher is somebody who will die for their ideas, which means at the same time who will dwell in their ideas. So this is a very passionary view. And of course, in this perspective, we see um, the view that Tarkovsky is so sacred in another light. So now I give you something else, another reflection, which is meant to um, stretch out what we've already seen and give it more meaning by combining it with the new one. Like the two bubbles popping into one another, but somehow forming a complete blue late evening horizon in which we can lower a bucket and take out some pellucid waters. The usual saying of Islam is that Christianity is a feminine religion. Now, we can give this a precise meaning, which is shown in the imagery that Islam uses in this case. So it's not just that they think Islam is feminine, but they also say this of, it's not Islam is masculine, but it's not just that they think Christianity is feminine, but they also think Judaism is feminine. So the image they give is of a figure, Christ, and Plato sitting outside the city weeping. So, okay, I guess I'm wrong there. So that's what I meant to say is that Athens and Christianity are viewed as feminine, then. So they're sitting outside the city weeping, whereas Moses, on the other hand, or has Tacitus as the man Moises, and involves him in all kinds of Roman scheming and things which would never be dreamed of either in the Quran version of Moses or in the other two Islamic versions of Moses, or in the Hebrew Bible. But here we see the sense of the drastic difference between. So notice that Plato and Christ go together. Why? Because the idea is that Socrates, through being dead, I'm dead to my interests, I'm dead to my passions, I stand outside in the realm of dead and philosophize, theorize. This is how he's standing outside the village or the city weeping, according to the way the Islamic tradition sees it. So we see that what happens then is there's traditions that are supposedly in the in keeping both with the political life or the dwelling, and then there's those which deny a part of the dwelling and say, I'm going to look at this thing without being part of it. And that these two traditions then contrast. So maybe in the light of that, what we see in Israel is just what the Jewish nation always was when it was not subject to diaspora. So, and then these characteristics it took under diaspora, which Nietzsche understands as the Enteignung, or the degenerate features, were only an adaptation to that position of not having a nation. So then we see the Christian and philosophic tradition as it becomes enlightened, and so as it becomes experimental science, or from the metaphysical point of view, science taken as the lower half of the higher part of the divided line episteme, and or which corresponds mostly to mathematics, plus the theory of the relativity of where the measurements taken in Einstein, or the victory of the intuitionists who say mathematics is intuitional or related to the outside world, primarily over the formalists, which led to Einstein's theory of relativity, because the measurement has to be taken by some individual at some time, and that requires to be singular in some sense, but we can formalize it and make it within the system of some mathematics, which is which is non-contradictory within itself, will allow us to work on and therefore to control in some way, and therefore to call it science. Taken from within this perspective, we can see why Heidegger is basically he's using the phrase present tense to name is standing outside and merely looking on.